Hi guys, welcome back. Hopefully you're having a great day. We'll get started painting here in just a minute, but in the meantime, why don't you guys let me know where you're watching from. I see a couple of our regulars are already appearing in the chat. Good to see you guys, welcome back. Now let me know if you guys can hear me all right. I have my mic turned on, everything looks like it's working properly. And I think we've got the camera the way we want it to be. So we should be all good to get going today. Good to see you here in the chat, Kaora. Music's a little bit loud. Well, let's decrease that a little bit. Is that a little better? Well, we can keep playing around with these settings until we get comfortable. Now, some of it might be the positioning of my mic as well. I've got it a little bit different spot than it was last time. And I just moved it just now, so hopefully that helps a little bit. That particular song is also one of the louder ones, I think. So that might have impacted it as well. So you're watching from Texas. What time is it over in Texas right now? And then let me know, guys, I just adjusted the music again. Can you hear it all right? Relative, I guess, to the volume of my voice. And I'll try to talk loud, because I know this mic at the angle I'm at right now might not be picking up all of my voice. Okay, so you're only an hour off from where I'm at then. I thought it was a bigger difference than that. Well, let's go ahead and get started working on the model. So tonight we're going to be working on the Minotaur that we worked on the last 2 weeks. Well, last 2 times we streamed. So I think what we're going to do for this model tonight, we're going to start with the hair. We're going to dry brush that first. And then I think after that, we'll shade the metal for the armor. And then once that shade is dried, we'll do our highlighting and building the color back up. And from there, we'll go into the detail work. We've got to do the kind of his clothing. We've got to do the leather work, the handle of his axe, and the horns. So we got a lot of stuff to do. A lot of little small things that individually aren't all that long, or all that long or hard to do. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So for the dry brushing on the hair, we're going to do Xandri dust for this one. It's this tan color. Lighter than what the hair is currently. And we're going to use one of my kind of medium-sized dry brushes. I would use the size smaller than this, but as you can see, it is like the bristles are shorter. Like these brushes started out being roughly the same length, and just over a lot of time I've just worn this one down. So this one's a little too stiff now for dry brushing. So when I do dry brushing, I guess I can kind of try to show. So I've got this dirty paper towel here. Get the pot of paint, and we're going to get just a little bit of the paint, and we're just going to wipe it out on the paper towel. And usually I like to do a couple different dips of the paintbrush just to kind of get the paint worked into the bristles. And then once we're happy with the consistency, we just start dry brushing. Now when I do this, I've got to be careful. This brush is a little bit bigger than I'd like to be using. Just got to make sure I don't get this on the armor and the details around. If I do a little bit, it's okay. I can just clean it up. Oh, see there, I went a little bit too heavy, which is fine. You can always shade it back down if you go too heavy in a spot. And he's also got fur on his arms that we've got to work on. You can see I overdid it a little bit there. It's okay. We'll fix it later. And then around the feet, since we haven't painted the hoofs yet, I can go ahead and just dry brush onto the hooves and it won't be a problem. Because otherwise you're really going to struggle getting this hair because there's not a ton of it. Yeah, dry brushing is a crazy technique. Oops. It's not very hard, but it does a lot of heavy lifting for your paintwork. If there were 3 techniques I could say that a beginner needs to know, it's dry brushing, highlighting, and how to use shades. If you know how to do those 3 things, you can do most of the other painting techniques that people use. When you do dry brushing, make sure you really take time to rinse out your brush. That's what I'm doing right now off screen. Just because what you don't want is the pigment and the kind of the powder that develops in your brush from dry brushing. You don't want that to be left for the next time you do dry brushing, because you don't want to have, like, especially when you're doing metallics, you don't want metallic flakes in your solid colors. I think red is probably one of the worst offenders. You don't want red flakes in your blue dry brushing or whatever color you're using. Okay, our next step, we've got 2 colors here. For all of the bronze armor, we're going to use contrast Gilliman flesh. And then for all the iron armor, we're going to use contrast basilicanum gray. Now, you could also, instead of using Gilliman flesh, you could go Agrax Earthshade if you wanted a darker brown tone in the recesses. Or you could do Nuln Oil instead of the black. I've chosen these colors because they leave a little bit cleaner finish in terms of not making the model look dirty, and that's what we're going for on this particular model. So we'll start with the basilicanum gray. And I'm gonna, pot of paint is just gonna be slightly off screen because I don't want it to get in the way of my arm. I don't want to accidentally bump it and spill it. That would be unfortunate. We're just going to get a little bit in the tip of the brush, like that. and we're just going to start slathering it over the iron armor. Now when you do this, I'm not doing a ton of paint here because this is a contrast paint and it's designed to be slathered on thicker, and it's designed to leave a black or gray finish. But we're using it as a shade, so we want it to be less aggressive because we still want the metal to show through. When you're doing contrasting like this, on a small model like this, not a huge problem with just kind of going any which direction with the brush. But if you were doing a model with sharper ridges or something larger, you want to make sure that you go and apply the paint in line with the recesses on the model, because if you go against them, you end up flicking paint around. And then you get black splotches on other parts of the model or the wall behind you. You'd be surprised how far paint can fly when it gets flicked out of a brush. Okay, we're almost done here with the iron armor. We just have this plate here and then his axe head. This plate here is a little bit different just because it doesn't have as many recesses. So just make sure that you don't let it pool up too aggressively in one spot, because that'll look out of place. You just want to make sure the coverage is consistent across the whole flat surface. And we'll do the axe head as well. I am going to get a little bit more water in my brush for the axe head, just because this contrast is a little bit thick. And having your brush have just a little bit of water in it just helps thin down the paint just a smidge. Texas Wargaming, it's good to see you here. So when it comes to dry brushing, a tip that I have found, it's okay to go too light, it's not okay to go too heavy. Because good dry brushing, you'll build up over multiple passes with the dry brush. And so if you go too light, it's fine because you just go back over it again with another coat of dry brushing. But if you go too heavy, you end up just ruining the effect. And so I would start practicing just going really light and then slowly start adding in more paint on the brush until you find the kind of the consistency that is right for your painting style, because not everyone's going to be exactly the same. People paint differently. We all have different skill sets and kind of different ways that our hands move with the brush, and so we can't all do it exactly the same. Okay, I think we just got to get the back of the plate that hangs down the front. Okay, so that's that color in place. When you're using contrast paints like this, make sure you rinse your brush frequently. Contrast paints and shades have a tendency to absorb into the bristles of your brush. And then another tip, when possible, make sure that your brush is always angled down while you're doing shades, and just any painting in general, because that way gravity is, pulling the paint down, and it's not all just flowing back into the base of the brush. Okay, now we're going to get that Gilliman flesh. And this is a very brown contrast. You don't want to go too heavy with this one because it will turn the model pretty brown. Get this up here in the right spot. I like using this one over copper because it kind of brings out the orange and red tones in the copper. Which makes sense because this is a flesh tone, so it's supposed to end up looking like peachy if you put it over a white base. So it's been an interesting day here in Idaho. We've got this winter storm that's come in, but it's not cold enough to be a proper like blizzard. So we're getting these really strong winds, but instead of snow, it's been rain and slush all day. And so you got these rivers and puddles in the roads that you can just see the wind rippling across them. I had to leave and go do grocery shopping earlier today, and it was miserable walking through today's weather. And like the wind it's not a warm wind, it's like a Arctic wind that just chills you all the way to the bone. It's kind of crazy. Good day to not be outside. CEO 14, good to see you in here. Welcome back. I know you're from here as well, so you've probably been experiencing the lame weather today as well. Okay, so now we've got to let those colors kind of dry a little bit. Luckily, it shouldn't take too long. But I think while we're waiting, let's see, what should we do while we wait? I think while we're waiting, we'll work on establishing the base color for his little skirt. And so I'm using a custom color that I've mixed up here. It is a mix of Cabalite green and Stegodon scale green. I believe it's 2 parts Cabalite green, which looks like this, and then 1 part Stegodon scale green. I don't have that one on hand right now to show you what it looks like. But I literally just poured 2 pots of Cabalite and 1 pot of Stegodon into this larger bottle. And that's what we're going to use as our base color for the clothing. So we're just going to pour a little bit of this, and hopefully, if we're lucky, this hasn't sealed off. Oh, perfect. It's pouring just fine. Put just a little bit of that on the palette. The only downside to using a bottle like this is it's a little bit annoying to get the paint back in the pot if you've got extra, because you have to totally unscrew the lid and yeah. Okay, we're going to water this down just a little bit so it flows a little bit easier. Doesn't need to be watered down too much though, because we already watered it down when I mixed the big pot of paint. I think we're going to switch brushes here and work with a slightly more controlled brush. The brush we've been using for our shading is a little bit of an older, more worn out brush. Of course, this one's getting there too. Texas Wargaming. It's funny that you, kind of the way you describe your weather last week in Texas. So that's like Idaho from February up through about May. The weather can't decide if it's going to be spring or winter yet. So we get like days where it'll be cold for part of the day, warm for the other part of the day. Kind of like today. Today's just worse, and I think today it's the wind that's making it worse. I'm assuming you guys get some bad wind down there, because, I mean, Texas itself isn't the prime tornado country, but I think you guys get those down there. I don't actually know. I've never been to Texas. Does it get really windy down there? Let me know. So it is probably going to take a couple coats to get this teal color built up on this cloak. That is one thing you always have to be aware of. Anytime you paint over a black base, if you're doing a lighter color, it does take more coats to get the paint on. Just because it's how paint works. Lighter colors over darker colors tend to be a little harder to cover things up. Okay, this is going to be a little bit difficult, and I'm not going to be able to really show it very well on screen, but you want to make sure when you do the skirt on these models, that you get the inside of the skirt, because it is visible when you're looking at the model, especially if you pick the model up and start actually looking at it in detail. You'll be able to tell if you didn't paint down under the skirt. And that does include up, under, between the legs, because these models are actually sculpted. The ones that you can actually tell, they are sculpted with the clothing wrapping down underneath, which I like that detail. Something that companies like Games Workshop, they tend to just leave that space empty. They'll throw like just other random details in there. They don't ever throw clothing down underneath. Just kind of an odd random thing that I've noticed that I like with the design of these models. And I think that's about as good as I'm going to be able to get that side. The hard side is going to be getting the inner side of the back of the little skirt. And that's just because to get in there, you have to do the brush from the front. And as you can see, there's like next to no space to get in there. And especially no space for letting the camera see what I'm doing right now. Yes, other details. That's the term I'm going to use, Czar. Games Workshop's go-to thing for filling in the details down between the legs, in my experience, has been just like matted fur, like lots of hair, or they'll just throw a random loincloth in that doesn't make any sense. Like you'll have a giant demon that could be wearing, awesome armor, and instead they've just got a loincloth. I don't know, maybe that's just their art style, or it's lazy sculpting. I don't know. It's better than sculpting other stuff down there, I suppose. Anyway, we will change the subject because that's a weird conversation. So today I had an interesting experience, actually only about maybe 2 hours ago. Was sitting working on my next paint tutorial, and I got a phone call from one of the local game stores. They are opening up a new store, or rather they're moving one of their existing locations to a new spot. And they want to get into miniatures games, so they asked if I would be willing to help them with their terrain situation. So I think, and we still have to kind of negotiate and discuss it a little bit more, but I think the idea is that they will buy me all the materials I need, and I will craft them some really cool terrain. And then I'm viewing it as kind of like a helping establish a business relationship with them. So even if they don't pay me or anything like that, it kind of completes two things. It helps grow the gaming community around here, and then I'm hoping it'll also help put me on good terms with them so that in the future we can do collaborations with them, giveaways or something. Would be cool. But we'll see what happens. Worst case scenario, I make them a couple tables of terrain and I never hear from them again, and I go on with life. I enjoy making terrain, so it's fine. And that'll be terrain specifically for Star Wars Legion, is the game they want to promote. So it'll be fun. I haven't actually made Star Wars specific terrain, so they'll kind of serve as, I guess you could say, the guinea pigs. And then I can learn from that project and go make my own terrain later on. Okay, I think we've about got all of the skirt with at least a couple coats on it. Now, there's another spot here. On my other Minotaurs, I did the handle wraps with this same teal green color. I'm having a hard time deciding, though, on this particular model, because as you can see on his particular weapon, he has the wooden part, which looks like it's been, carved off, like the bark has been taken off. But then here, I can't decide if this is a handle wrap, like fabric, or if it is the bark and they've left the bark on in those spots. What do you guys think? I mean, I'm kind of inclined to just paint it the same green and just say that it's a handle wrap, even if it's not meant to be. Because it's kind of just a weird way to sculpt the thing. Take a drink real quick while we're trying to decide. Ivory. So you're saying that should be ivory for the handle? Is that what I'm understanding here? Could be interesting. Or are you saying ivory is the haft of the hammer? Guess in the meantime, I'm also going to look up what Parabellum did on the official model. That might help me understand what the intention of that sculpting was. Okay, so I'm looking at the picture for the box art model, and it looks like they have it as bark, so it's got a... Okay, so I think what they're actually doing is they have it as a metal handle, and it has wooden handles that are like slid over the metal. Which I guess that makes sense. It's kind of an interesting way to do it. Okay. Well, we'll just play around with it and see what we can come up with. In the meantime, I'll just leave that area alone and we'll continue layering the skirt. I think one more coat, and it's not going to be... You don't necessarily have to paint this coat everywhere. You could just look for spots where the black is still showing through and just paint there. Okay, good enough. Okay, at this point it looks like our contrast paint on the armor is dry. So we're going to start with the iron. I'm going to get a slightly finer brush here. This is a size 0. And we're going to take Iron Breaker, this color here. So Iron Breaker is a step lighter than Lead Belcher, which Lead Belcher is what we used in the base as the base color last time we painted. So you can kind of see the difference in the tones. And this color actually has a pretty good consistency right out of the pot, so we're not gonna get any out on the palette. We're just gonna go straight from the pot. And what we're going to do is we're just going to start on the scale mail here, and we're going to lightly start highlighting this on, but we're focusing on really only putting this in the areas where there's the least amount of the contrast pooled up. Any spots where the contrast pooled up, we'll go ahead and leave a little bit darker, either by doing a thinner coat or by just not painting over it at all. And the result will be two things. First, in the recesses, so the actual intersection points between the different pieces of metal, it'll, leave a shadow. But then on the flat surfaces where it's pooled up and you don't paint over it, it's going to leave it looking tarnished. Like something has rubbed up against it and has just kind of tarnished the polished finish that a suit of armor would have, like at the beginning of a battle. And that's kind of been part of the goal for this army. I want them to look clean, like they're an army marching onto the battlefield at the beginning of the fight. They're not, halfway through a long conflict or campaign. They're still at the beginning and still very clean. when you're doing this, make sure you don't have too much of the paint in your brush, because you want to be able to still have control as you layer this paint on. You don't want to put a huge dot of paint and then have it like ruin the area you're working with, especially if you're working around areas where the detail comes up close to other colors. If you have too much paint on your brush, it's a lot easier to overpaint and get paint where you don't want it. Okay, we'll move on up to this upper piece of the shoulder. Now the scale mail is a little weird here because they sculpted it so that like the scales are visible as you go towards the top of the shoulder pad, but as you get further down it starts to turn into more of like diamonds, almost as if it were turning into a gambeson instead of a layered plate of scales, which I suppose does leave you open to interpret the sculpting differently. You could just give this guy a gambeson padded armor up here instead of metal, and it probably would still look okay. So I always ask this, but what kind of projects are you guys working on while you watch the stream tonight? Anybody have anything fun they're working on? Cool model, or maybe some terrain, or maybe something completely unrelated to miniatures? Oh, Zargifli, you're working on a Land Raider, huh? That's pretty exciting. Is it a just a normal Land Raider, or is it a specific pattern? I don't know, maybe it's a Crusader, or maybe it's one of the Forge World ones. Either way, I look forward to seeing it. Are you going to paint it up to match your salamanders that you've been working on the last few times we've streamed? Or is it going to go with a different Space Marine army? Okay, a Land Raider Redeemer with the Flamers. That's exciting. I assume that means it's going to be a Salamander then, because that would be the one that would make the most sense to have flamethrowers on. I'm assuming that also means it's going to be full of something nasty. I know when we have played in the past, you have a couple squads of those Centurion Devastator, or not Devastators, but the Assault Centurions. I assume that those are going in that Land Raider. Okay, so we're done with the scale mail armor. Oh wait, no we're not. We've got one more shoulder pad. Don't mind me. So one thing with these colors being as similar as they are, sometimes it can be hard to keep track of where you've already painted and where you haven't. Really, all that I have to tell apart these colors right now is the light. So like the light reflects more off of the areas that have been highlighted because those areas haven't been dulled down by the contrast paint that we put over the lead belcher. Okay, now I think we can say we've painted all of the scale mail. So now we're going to work on this flat piece down here. And this is where you're going to start using that tarnished look a little bit more, because there's a lot more flat surfaces for the contrast to have deposited on. And you don't have to leave every spot the contrast pooled in, tarnished looking. You can layer over it. It's kind of just at your own judgment here. Because sometimes the paint just pools up because you didn't evenly spread the paint out, rather than it actually being like a recess there or a spot where it makes sense to be tarnished. And other times, maybe you just prefer the model being even cleaner looking than what it already is. And once again, we're working on getting the area down underneath on the back side of that armor plate. Pretty straightforward and easy to get to for this particular model. We also want to make sure we get the sides of the panel, especially on one that's thick like this. You'll definitely notice if you don't paint the sides. Okay. So that's all we're going to do with highlighting that way. For the axe head, we're actually going to bring our dry brush back and dry brush this over. And the main reason for that, with how flat the surface of the axe head is, in the past when I've tried layering it manually, it just hasn't looked right. So we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing here, because I found that the dry brushing helps make it look a little bit more random and natural. You could do this on the scales as well. I just chose not to because I think, so like the trade-off is you get more control doing it the other way, but on large flat surfaces, dry brushing the metal on is superior. It looks more natural and believable, at least in my opinion. And I'm not going terribly heavy here, and it's really only a very subtle change to the axe head. And there we go. I might have even gone a little bit too heavy on the front side of the face of the axe, but that's okay. Okay. Okay, now before we go on to the bronze armor, we're actually going to take and shade the teal. That way the shade can be drying while we're working on the bronze. We save a little bit of time that way. I definitely enjoy having a break from recording videos, because when I paint models that aren't in a recorded video, I don't have to be as, I guess, methodical in how I apply colors. So like when I do a tutorial, for the sake of the tutorial, I would want to do the bronze first and not even worry about this. But when I'm painting just for fun, you can have multiple steps going at the same time on the project and it doesn't get in the way. So I actually paint a lot faster when I'm not recording it. When you do this shading, just be careful not to get this on the colors around it too much. And a little bit's okay. But being a kind of teal blue color, this will really mess up the look of your metal if it gets on the metallic parts, or even really any of the other colors. Like blue will look out of place over everything, except for what it's meant to go over, I suppose. And we got to make sure we get the back side of the inside of the skirt as well. And I'm sure skirt is probably not the correct term for this, but it was a term that I felt everybody would understand easily, so that's what we're calling it. It is a skirt. Okay, it seems like that is shaded up, so we are going to go back to the bronze now. Okay, so for the bronze, we're going to take, we've done this before, we did this a couple weeks ago on the hoplites that we were working on. But we're going to take 2 parts copper from Pro Acryl and 1 part Gehenna's Gold. The reason we're doing the mixture is because I didn't quite like the copper by itself. To me, it was a little too light and didn't have enough of that kind of orange pigmentation that you get in a more gold-oriented bronze. So we're going to throw in just a smidgen of the Gehenna's Gold to kind of give it that orange tone a little bit more. But we don't want to go so far that it just flat out turns the model gold, or the paint gold. You're fine, Texas Wargaming, even if you did miss a little bit. You can always go back through and watch these streams later. That's one thing I like about streaming on YouTube versus like Twitch. With Twitch, I would have to manually go through and save the video recordings of previous streams. With YouTube, they're just automatically there, as far as I know, forever. So you'll be able to go back and view these whenever you want. Okay. Whenever I use these Pro Acryl bottles, I like to, after I close it, take a brush and get whatever little drop of paint is left on the tip of the brush and get it off. Because otherwise it's just a smidgen more paint that you're wasting. Okay, we're going to get Gehenna's Gold, and this is kind of a rough amount. Like, it's not going to be exactly a 2-to-1 ratio. It might be within a little bit of variation, and that's okay. Get a little bit of water and mix this in. Now, because it's metallics, we don't want a ton of water. Too much water will cause the metal, like fragment bits that are in here, the metallic dust, to separate. It'll also cause the different pigments that give it its orange and yellow color to separate. But a little bit of water is good because we want to make sure that this flows smoothly. We're going to take that same size 0 brush that we used before. And we'll start on the back and we'll start layering these pieces of armor. We're doing this exactly the same way we did the iron. Another thing that I like to do for metal, especially when I'm working with metals that are similar, if you don't paint all the way up to the edges, you end up leaving a little bit of a shadow. And that helps add a little bit of depth to your metallics. So I don't know if any of you guys are Star Wars fans, but I have to say that so far the new season of Mandalorian is great. I won't give spoilers because that would be kind of mean, but I will say that it's been a lot of fun, and so far I think it's my favorite of the 3 seasons of Mandalorian, because the first 2 seasons really started off kind of slow where you didn't really know what was going on. This season jumps straight into the plot points. Like, right off the beginning, you know what the objective is for the main characters, you know what they're trying to accomplish. And they don't really, at least so far in the first 2 episodes, they haven't wasted time with filler episodes. Something important has happened in both episodes, which is kind of a nice change of pace, because we had shows like Andor, which were really good, but they'd go multiple episodes with nothing major happening. And so it was a little hard to just watch them, especially when there would be 2 or 3 weeks in a row where the episode wouldn't do anything. So I'm happy that Mandalorian is being a little bit more to the point with its episodes. Hey Jocelyn, welcome back into the stream. It's been a couple weeks. We didn't stream last week because I was supposed to be. So there's a couple things. First, the first Friday of the month, I'm going to try and not stream because I host a kind of like a game night for games that we don't play very often. So we played Age of Sigmar last week, and I think next month we'll play, we'll play something else. It'll be fun. Next week, I'm not going to do a stream because it's St. Patrick's Day on Friday, and I know my family's going to do a little bit of a get-together Friday evening. So you guys will have to do without a stream next week, I guess. Or we could do it a different night. We'll figure it out. Of course, I don't think there's another night that really works next week to do a live stream. So for those that just joined into the stream, we've been working on the armor and detail work of this Minotaur. Right now we are layering a mixture of copper from Pro Acryl and Gehenna's Gold from Citadel. And we are just kind of layering over the armor plates to give them a nice shine. And that's what we've been working on so far. We might actually finish this Minotaur tonight. Wouldn't surprise me at all. We're only about an hour into the stream now, and we've already accomplished quite a bit. It's going to come close. This will for sure be the last night we work on this Minotaur, though. I want to do something different for the next stream, I think. I know Parabellum has sent me something. I don't know what yet, but I got a tracking number from them the other day. And whatever it is, it's still crossing the ocean, but I assume it's one of 3 things. My first guess is that it is the new Wadroon stuff that's coming out in a week or 2. And they want me to, feature it on my channel. Second guess is that it's the new Old Dominion stuff, the Varangian Guard kit. If that's it, that would be really cool, because then that's one less box of models I have to buy for myself. It would be cool to feature those on the channel. The third option, and this one seems a little less likely, but there's a small chance it could also be one of the giants for the city-states. The reason I say that one's a less likely outcome is because those don't release till April, and I feel like it would be a little odd for them to send me it this far in advance, just based on when they've sent me model releases in the past. So I'm excited to see what's in that package when I get it. It'll probably arrive the middle of this week, or this coming week. I think regardless of what it is, it'll be fun to feature on the channel. I know my wife is hoping it'll be the new Wadroon stuff so she can try out new playstyles with her army. But I think I'm content with anything. I didn't even ask for anything, they just sent it to me, which means they must have liked the way the tutorials for the city-states turned out or something. Which I am perfectly happy knowing that my content has been noticed by them. That's a positive thing, I think. It's an attack box, huh? So like a mimic. They've sent me a mimic that looks like a box of miniatures, but it's actually gonna tear my face off. I'm honestly actually kind of hoping it's the Veterans kit and the Chieftain, because I think those would make a really fun pair of tutorials to include on my channel. The Old Dominion ones would be cool as well, but more recently I've painted lots of Old Dominion. I think I did 3 different Old Dominion tutorials in January. So doing a Wadroon tutorial would be a good change of pace for those that watch all my tutorials. Plus, painting the red skin on the Wadroons, because my wife's Wadroon I paint have red skin, and then the ones that are for me I paint with the green. But the red skin is actually a lot of fun, and it looks really good on Wadroon. So have any of you guys gotten a chance to try out the new scenario packet that was released this week for Conquest? It was kind of a minor update. It wasn't anything major. They just changed a couple things with how objective zones and objective markers work. They clarified a few things. And I'm trying to remember. I have to keep track of what they released in this update versus the stuff that I'm currently involved with playtesting. I found this release of a new scenario packet to be quite interesting just because I was under the impression we were still testing the scenarios. So the stuff I'm testing now, I'm assuming, is stuff that'll change down the road a few months. Or it could be stuff that they just wanted to see how it would work, and maybe they'll never end up actually using it. Who knows? But I was kind of surprised to see a new rules packet released this week. Okay, I think we finished up the bronze. So, got a nice shiny guy here. I honestly have no idea what's going to be in the one-player starter set for the city-states. I haven't really heard much discussion about it, really. If we follow the patterns of what they've included in past ones, it's normally a character and then 4 regiments. And And the 4 regiments, I think it's 4. Now I've got myself doubting myself. But I think they usually try to do 2 infantry and then some sort of like monster or brute. Maybe it's only 3. Now I've got to go look it up and see how many in the other kits. But I'm assuming we'll see probably the, what's it called? Polemark. And then probably hoplites and phalangites. Probably 2 of their kit. And then I'm assuming we got a box of Minotaurs. And then that last unit could be anything, really. It could be the Agema or the Thorakites kit. I could also see them dropping the Minotaurs out and putting one of the Giants in there instead. But I also could see an argument for not putting the Giant in the one-player starter, just because its price point is only about, what, $40 less than a normal 2-player starter, or 1-player starter. And so I feel like putting a Giant in there might make the value of the box too good. Hey Judd, good to see that you're in here in the stream watching. And thank you. I am pretty happy with how this Minotaur is coming along so far. I don't know if you watched the last stream, but part of this model we decided on as a group. We put it up for like a little vote in the chat last time, and so that's why he's got the black splotches, because we decided to make him a spotted Minotaur. Okay, so now that we're done with that, I think our next step is going to be to get Cabalite Green, and we are going to start layering over the skirt. And this will take a couple coats, because Cabalite Green is a color that in my experience doesn't like to go on in a single coat, or even 2 coats. Sometimes it takes 3. We'll get some of this here on the palette. And water it down just a smidgen. Gonna bring that size 0 brush back out again. I could use a larger brush for this, but with how close we're going to be getting to some of the other details on the model, like around the metal and everything, I'd rather just have a little more control. It'll take a little bit longer doing it with a smaller brush, but I think that's okay. Unless it's a really big model with a lot of flat surfaces, I will almost always pick a smaller brush that gives me more control over a large brush that does the job faster. And like I said, it's the exception being really big vehicles. Like if I were doing a tank for Warhammer, I'd probably pull out the big brush because I'm not as worried about being as precise on such a large surface. Now I am layering this, for the most part, just over the kind of creases in the skirt. And then anywhere that's a flat surface that I think should be a little bit lighter. And I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but in person doing this step is really interesting because the Cabalite Green it's just a weird color. It's green, but it's also got like a minty color to it. And while it's still wet, that mint color just kind of pops out. And it's not until it dries that it starts looking normal. You know, I think the city-states have a lot of really cool units that I'm excited for. The companion cavalry are going to be cool, and I've heard it commented by a couple Hundred Kingdoms people, both online and in person, that they're concerned a little bit that the companion cavalry might kind of steal the niche role that the Hundred Kingdoms have, being a cavalry army. So I'm kind of interested to see how they affect the meta of the army when they come out, because they are a really solid cavalry unit. They're also the only kind of normal cavalry unit that the army has, because they have the chariot, but the chariot's not going to be normal. It's going to be a model that takes up 2 base plates, like 2 stands for cavalry. So it's going to be a long model. It's also going to be one of the first non-monster regiments to have a single model for its minimum size. And I think that's going to be really cool. It's also got, I believe it's the first unit in the game to have customization options where you can pick between 2 different weapons that it puts on the back. I don't think we've seen that before on anything, at least not in Last Argument. I know that in First Blood, at least the polemark can choose between a sword or a spear, and his profile changes based on which he takes. But it's interesting to see a cavalry unit that's going to be a single model and have customization options, like loadout customization options that change the gameplay. I'm very curious to see the Inquisitors. So those are coming out by the end of the year, according to the little Conquest postcard that retailers get. It looks like by the end of the year we'll have the Satyrs - Fawn kit. So we're going to have the Selene Hunters and Rangers by the end of the year. We're also going to have the Eidolon, which is like a mechanical Iron Man type character. And then we're also going to have the Inquisitors. And the Inquisitors, as far as I understand in the concept art, there is one particular picture where you see 2 city-states guys standing there, and behind them there's this like ghost-looking dude. Supposedly that's an Inquisitor. So there are going to be these giant hooded, I almost picture them being kind of like almost like a Dementor type look from Harry Potter. It's kind of how they look in that piece of concept art. And that's going to be another brute unit for the army. So this army is going to have, I think, about 6 infantry regiments by the end of the year, and then technically 3 brutes, because the Minotaurs are 2 different regiments. Yeah, I agree with you there. The chariots are going to just aesthetically look really good on the tabletop. They're going to give a very unique look to the army that nobody else has. In my personal opinion, I think that someday the Hundred Kingdoms will get something similar to the chariot, where it's a cavalry that takes up 2 stands. I think they'll do like some sort of siege equipment at some point. Not quite siege equipment, but I could see like a ballista being drawn by a team of horses, or even just their own version of the chariots. But that, when I say someday, that's like not any time in the near enough future to worry about. It's kind of interesting. As Vanguards, each month we give kind of like a report of everything we've done for Conquest in the last month, report on what events we've hosted, and it's also an opportunity for us to submit any questions we have. There was a survey in this month's feedback form where they asked us, they started with the first 4 armies, so Spires, Hundred Kingdoms, Nords, and Dwegome. And they asked us which models from those armies we would like to see resculpted. And they gave us like 4 options for each one. And we were supposed to rate them on a scale of 1 to 4, how badly we thought they needed a resculpt. I noticed that for the Spires, it was units like the Abomination and the Force-Grown Drones, just a couple of their old kits. Same with the 100 Kingdoms. And I thought that was interesting that, at the very least, Parabellum is resculpting some of those older kits. And I just find that interesting because they're not even that old. None of the kits in Conquest are older than 5 years old, as far as I'm aware. Because I think the first kits were in 2018, I think. Jocelyn, I agree with you. I'm excited for the satyrs in the game. I've had a bit of a debate as to how they're supposed to be pronounced, because it's spelled Selenoi for the Rangers. But if it's like Cataphracti, Cataphracti is spelled Cataphractoi, but pronounced Cataphracti. So I'm wondering if it's actually Selene, or something similar to that. But they're going to be super fun for the gameplay, and their maneuverability, their ability to flank behind the enemy is really cool. This whole army is exciting. Like, Conquest has some of the coolest army concepts, and they keep managing to like one-up themselves every time they release a new army concept. Like, city-states are awesome, Old Dominion's awesome, and now we've got the Sorcerer Kings, and they're just... I wasn't sold on their concept at first, but now I'm getting really excited about it. Seeing the concept art has really sold me on them as well. So you're not wrong there, Judd. The older kits are a little harder for newer people to get into without the numbered pieces. And the one that surprised me being on that poll was the Abomination, because I personally really like the Abomination kit. It's meant to look weird. I think the reason that they would consider resculpting it, though, is because I know a lot of people don't like trying to pose it with those ball and socket joint limbs. Personally, I really like the ball and socket joint on the Abomination. But if you're not good at posing miniatures, I've seen some pretty dorky looking Abominations just in pictures online. Okay, so we finished layering that Cabalite green over the skirt. So now we're going to take Cyberite green and we're going to use this as the edge highlight. Now don't judge me too harshly throughout here. I am not super great at edge highlighting. So I haven't built any Dwegom other than the Hellbringer Drake. Are their sprues really hard to work with? Are they like unnumbered? When I've built Conquest kits, I've honestly found that after you've built the first sprue, most of the time you've figured out how the models go together. And I honestly don't look at the instructions after the first few models are built. I found that they're not super necessary. So as I'm getting ready to do this edge highlighting, this brush is starting to get towards the end of its useful life for edge highlighting. So this might not turn out as fine as I want it, but what I've done is I put a drop of water in the little catching dish here on the pot for the paint. I put a little bit of water in there so I could thin it down just there on the top of the pot. And then I'm wiping off the excess paint on the palette here. I'm just trying to get the right amount of paint in here and get the right consistency so that I can get good smooth lines. There we go. When you do edge highlighting like this, technically you're supposed to use the side of the brush, not the tip. that only really works when you've got clearly defined edges to catch. Some of these edges on this model are a little more rounded, and so using the edge of the brush doesn't give quite the same crisp line that I'd like. So I am kind of switching between using the edge and using the tip of the brush a little bit. And I guess worst case scenario, if I decide I'm not happy with how this is turning out, I can always come back to it later. And you don't have to go too crazy with these highlights. The main thing is to catch for sure catch the bottom ridge, and then any of the most profound or defined, I guess, wrinkles or creases in the fabric. And sometimes when I'm edge highlighting, if I get fed up with it, I'll just go the easy route and just do a few highlights and then leave the rest to be sad on its own. So far this model seems like it's going all right though. Don't be in a hurry when you do edge highlights like this. It is worth your time to take it slow and be relaxed with it. Anytime you rush, that's when you make mistakes. And ultimately, making a mistake costs you more time than if you had just taken your time to begin with. Because it's still faster to go slow on edge highlighting than it is to have to go through and repaint everything because you messed up. And luckily this project doesn't have too much sharp edge highlighting, just because, I mean, there's not a ton of details that need it. And then it's up to you when you do your own model. You don't have to highlight the inner sides of the clothing. Most people would say don't waste your time with it. I at the very least want to get the edge that is visible when you're looking at the model. So right up in here on the inside of the skirt. The rest of the ridges inside of it won't matter, but that one is visible, so it's good to pick it out. And then the inner edge of the back side of the skirt, you're not going to be able to get. Unless you don't have the model glued to the base, you won't be able to get in there with the paintbrush. At least not get in there with the paintbrush and do a good job. Okay, so there's the highlighting done on that little skirt, I think. Actually, there's one more ridge I'm going to catch. Let's get this little ridge right here. And this guy right here. Perfect. Yeah, this camera doesn't pick up this green very well. Like, it looks a lot better and a lot greener and brighter in person than it does on the camera. The camera kind of darkens everything down a little bit. Okay, so I think at this point we are ready to work on the leather on the model. And you have to give me just a minute because I just realized that the leather color I use is off to the side. So let me grab it. didn't have it sitting here on my paint desk like I normally do. Okay, here we go. So we're going to use Leather Brown from Vallejo. Yeah, that's what we're going to use. Now this color is a little bit different. The main reason I'm using this color is because it's different from the colors we used on the skin of the Minotaur. I don't like having the leather be the same color as the skin. It kind of brings up too many moral questions, like did this Minotaur skin one of his brothers to make his leather belt or the trim on his armor, and we don't want to have to answer that question. I feel like that would be a little awkward to ask a Minotaur that. Okay, we're going to water this down just a little bit. Perfect. Well, it's funny to think about it like that, but like if you're the city-states and you have these beasts of burden that are based off of cows, and cows are kind of the primary leather source, where did you get the leather that the Minotaurs are wearing? Had to come from somewhere. Who knows, maybe the Minotaurs have a culture of, like, don't waste anything, and so even their dead get to put to use. So maybe there's a... Yeah, it's pretty dark. Maybe the city-states, like, eat all the Minotaurs when they die, and then use their skins for their armor, and their straps on their armor. That's a little dark. Man, that's just dark to think about. I'm stuck on that. That's going to be stuck in my mind forever now. I'm never going to look at the city-states the same. But then you have to ask the question, like, how closely do Minotaurs associate themselves with their cousins, the cows, you know, like, is it ethically sketchy to eat a cow or kill a cow when there's Minotaurs around, or do they just not care because they recognize that they are not the cows? Ooh, an HQ Minotaur would be super cool. I would love to see that. When we were doing playtesting, at first I was hopeful that the Eidolon would be that, but then when I asked what the Eidolon was, I was told it was more like an Iron Man type suit that one of the city-states characters wears. But I think if there was an army that could justify a brute character, it would be the city-states, because they already throw their Minotaurs into the regiments as if they were command stands. That would be really cool. The other thing I think would be cool, if for a future Founders exclusive, they give us an alternate sculpt of the Minotaurs and do the concept art Minotaur with the six-pack, the bodybuilder Minotaur as we've called it. Do one of those as a Founders exclusive. I'd be all over that. I love this design of Minotaur. Like, the powerlifter design is cool. But it would also be cool to pay tribute to that original concept art that everybody was excited about. So if you've noticed, Parabellum's design philosophy with their armies has changed with their last two armies. They have... So, like, the first three or four armies have these massive army lists with lots of options. They basically show off all the options for the next, like, 5 years worth of releases. Well, the city-states in the Old Dominion didn't do that. The city-states actually have less entries than other armies before them. And as a result, there's really only maybe 2 years worth of releases for them planned in the immediate future, and then they're going to add more. I know I heard mention a few weeks ago of kind of starting to throw around ideas for future units to be added to armies. Because like even the 100 Kingdoms with their massive number of regiments in their army list, they're going to be done releasing everything in that book probably by the end of next year. And then city-states will be pretty much released next year as well. Everything that we know about so far. So there's definitely room to add more stuff later. Personally, I was disappointed that we didn't see things like a Cyclops and let's see, what are some of the other ones we saw? In the concept art, there was like a Chimera dash cockatrice bird mechanical thing, like a griffin almost, but with mechanical parts. I was sad we didn't see that as one of the monster options for the army during playtesting, and now that they're released, we still don't see it. So I'm assuming we'll see those someday in the future, the far, far future. I'm very curious to see how they design the satyrs and the fawns that are coming out later this year, because there's a lot of room to interpret those in different ways. Will they go a little bit more muscular or a little bit more skinny? We don't know. I assume they'll go for the skinny route, since they already have a really big, bulky unit in the army. So this part of the painting process is a little bit time consuming, because there is quite a bit of leather trim on this particular model. All of the scale mail armor has leather borders around it. So when you paint your own model, make sure you take the time to figure out where all the leather is. I think we'll also do the bark handles. I think I will do them as bark, just because that's something I know I can make look okay. It's kind of funny how often that's the deciding factor for what colors to paint stuff. Like when you know you can do a good job on something, that's just what you lean towards. Like ever since I did the Old Dominion, the red that I do on them, that's now my go-to recipe for red. Like any red I do, I like to use that recipe. When you're working around the front of this model, around his belt, make sure you pay attention to what you're doing, because there are a lot of different leather straps that go in different directions. And you want to make sure you don't accidentally paint the metal parts, but you also don't want to accidentally miss any of the leather parts. So just make sure you take the time to pay attention. Don't zone out when you're doing this front part. Something some of you may have noticed, I turn my model and rotate my models a lot. Like, it's rare that I rotate the brush around the model. I've always found that it's easier to keep your brush hand more or less in the same position all the time and instead change the orientation of the model. It's easier to train your hands to do the right brush strokes that way. Now obviously there are some models that are larger that you can't do that for, like painting Angron, which is what I've been working on for my next tutorial. That model is just so big you have to rotate your brush around because sometimes you just can't get to a good angle to paint some of the harder to reach parts without coming at it from a weird direction with the brush. Okay, we're making good progress here. I think we've almost got all of his lower body leather straps painted. There's just a little bit of trim left here on the front of this piece. It's a little hard to get to, but I think we'll do okay. Okay, now we're working on the upper body stuff. Now, there are a couple straps that are a little hard to get to on the upper body. So you have a strap here that goes under the armpit. This is holding this shoulder pad on. And then there's another strap on the back of the arm in here that is holding this armor piece on. So make sure you get both of those. And they are kind of a little annoying to get to. At least the one on the arm is. The one on the shoulder blade isn't as bad. And then when you do these armor pads up here, make sure you get the sides of the armor pieces. You don't want to end up having those be left black or whatever the colors you'd painted previously. And then when you're doing near the hair, be very careful to not paint on that hair because that's going to be annoying to have to go and redo. And the same can apply to this inner edge as well. There might be spots where you need to take your time and actually paint the inner edge so that it doesn't look out of place. But then there are other spots where the pieces are, I guess you could say the indent is minor enough that the shade will just cover it up and make it look like you painted all the way up to the exact border between the two colors. Another spot to note, this inner piece right here, there's trim to the upper shoulder pad that isn't super visible at a first glance, but once you pick up the model and start looking at it, you'll definitely notice if you haven't painted it. Because from above it's noticeable. And that also applies to the inside of the outer shoulder pad. It is visible from above as well, so you have to actually paint down into it a little bit to make sure that from the outside it looks like it's painted all the way down and is just one solid piece of leather. Okay. So here's an interesting question for you guys. Do you play multiple game systems? Or do you tend to find that you just play one and you don't have interest in playing other games? So for me personally, I play a lot of different games, or at least I collect a lot. I can really only say the ones that I play regularly are Warhammer 40k and Conquest. I play both of those at least once a week. Or at least I gather with friends with the intention of playing. Sometimes I'm the one that sits out and watches while other people play because we have an odd number. Or sometimes we get together to play and we end up just hanging out and chatting. But I do have other games. Let's see, I have collections for 40k, Age of Sigmar, Conquest, Star Wars Legion, War Machine. I've got a bunch of little minor games that I pick up here and there. Like I've got Warhammer Underworlds, Necromunda, Kill Team. Most of these I don't end up getting to play very often though, just because that's not what my main play groups play. And there's nothing wrong with only playing one game system. I noticed that Chuck says he only really plays 40k. That's perfectly fine. I enjoy 40k a lot. I think it's got its balance issues, certainly. But I still have fun 90% of the time I play it. It's rare that I have a bad game. I like to think that I'm a competent enough player that I can build lists that can play it just about any level. I don't think I'd be able to play at the top tier competitive level, but it's a little expensive to play multiple games. I'm feeling that a lot right now. There's a lot of cool releases for all these different games I play, and there's no way I can afford them all. 40k, this last year or so, I've developed this bad habit of starting new armies, like, all the time. I just picked up Angron and a couple World Eaters things recently. And I don't even have the codex. I've just been collecting the models. So Jocelyn, you mentioned Star Wars Armada. It looks like a lot of fun. The only reason... So there are a lot of games that look fun that I don't have because, again, the wallet fatigue, like I mentioned. I think I am split too many ways right now. Armada does look fun, though. I was at a game store a month ago, probably, and they had one of the Super Star Destroyers, like the really, really big ones, in one of the boxes, and it had an open front box so you could actually see the model, and that thing was massive. Like, I didn't realize just how big the ships went in Armada. One that I'd like to get people into, it's a discontinued game, but if you've ever heard of Halo Ground Command, it was made back in the mid to late 20-teens. So like 2015, 2016 is when it was out. Unfortunately, the company that was making it had some internal issues and ended up shutting down, but there's a fan community that keeps the game going. They've designed 3D print files for all the models, and they just make them publicly available to anybody who plays the game. And it actually looks like quite a bit of fun, especially with the fan community. There's a few really dedicated ones that have continued developing new units. It's a 10mm scale game, so it's lots of smaller models, but that allows them to do like all the big vehicles and stuff. It looks like a lot of fun. I'm kind of sad I didn't get into it when it was actually being officially produced. I'm sure there are some cool tournaments that I missed out on. The community for the game nowadays really only gets together about once a year, and there's maybe 15 people that show up and do a little tournament over the weekend. Texas Wargaming, that's kind of funny. I'm slowly getting to that point where I could say what armies I don't have rather than what ones I do. For 40k at least. Conquest, it's easier to list the armies I don't have. The only army I don't have is Dwego. I collect a little bit of everything for Conquest, and part of that's because as a YouTuber doing painting tutorials, it makes sense for me to pick up a little bit of everything. That way I can make sure I make videos for every army. I haven't done much with Dwegome, though. I've only done the one tutorial for them. And I don't own enough models to say I have a playable army of them. So at the beginning of the stream, we played around with the audio a little bit. We were adjusting the music volume and my voice volume. Let me know if you guys are having trouble hearing me or if the music's too loud or too quiet. Still trying to find the exact right spot, the sweet spot for all the audio levels. And today I'm also trying to talk louder because I noticed that in a few of my past streams when I went back and watched clips from them, my voice doesn't pick up super well on the microphone with where it's positioned. And especially towards the later end of the stream when I start having my voice kind of fail on me a little bit. I think I'm almost done. We've only got a few leather straps left to do, and then we can move on to shading it, and means I gotta remember what color I shaded it with in the tutorial. I'm glad I make these YouTube tutorials. I never thought that I'd be referencing my own tutorials to remember the recipes I used, but I've noticed I've been doing that a lot lately, where there's a model I painted a year ago, and I'm going to paint all his friends now, and I can't remember how I painted it. Because I usually forget to write down my paint recipes. Like a smart person would probably write it down. I guess for me, I just record it in a YouTube video and then have it on record forever. So what would you guys say is the most complicated miniatures game you've played? Like, hardest to learn, hardest to be good at? And honestly, I have to think about this question too, because I'm not quite sure which one I would say is the hardest one I've played. think when it comes to the game that is the most mentally demanding from me, it's actually Conquest. And it's not because Conquest is hard to play. Conquest at its core is easy. But I find that when I play against my group, because we're all pretty seasoned players at this point, we get kind of competitive. Like, not to the point of it being toxic, but like we build some nasty lists. And especially the players that I've played against the most, I find that I tend to get very tactical with my games. And after, like in a tournament, after 2 rounds of playing, maybe 3, my brain just starts to get fried. And I get like mentally tired. Okay, so I see Flames of War on here. I've watched that one be played, and I can agree it is pretty complicated sounding. Has lots of weird interactions for infantry and terrain and how they interact with the tanks. Haven't played it yet, though, so maybe once I play it, it'll seem less complicated. Yeah, and then like I said, Conquest just is, it's a very tactical game for me. I get very into it, and I've actually had some pretty stressful games. There have been ones where I'm legitimately like stressed out by the end of the game, like where I don't know how it's going to turn out, or maybe I've run out of tactical ideas for how to get out of a situation. But I think that's part of what makes it so fun as well. The fact that your tactical mindset actually affects the gameplay. It's not like there are games out there that, as long as you know how to list build, you always just win. I'm glad that Conquest has a tactical depth beyond that, where even with a theoretically underpowered list, you could still do really well if you know what you're doing. Another game that I found is kind of complicated, and I've only played it once, but I've read the rule books, some of the different iterations over the years. I think Infinity is a pretty complicated game too. There's a lot of little things like crouching and hacking and placement of your models with line of sight and reactions and stuff to keep track of. It's a cool looking game though. I've collected a few of the minis, and like I said, I've only played it the one time, and it was pretty complicated. You really have to think about your movement in that one, because if you move into line of sight of an enemy that's readied up, they'll just gun you down during your turn, which is super interesting. Okay, I think one more look over things. Looks to me like we are done with the base color for the leather. So what we're going to do next, I have to try and remember what color I used to shade this in my tutorial. These guys are starting to look like they're friends. I think on the leather I used a color like Nasdrag yellow, I think. And then I used Agrax on the handle, I think. So that's what we're going to do. I do need to dig those colors out though, so we'll get my buckets of paint here. And have Nasdrag yellow. And then I think I already dug out Agrax, so we're fine on that one. As you can tell, this contrast is very separated. You can see the yellow pigment and the brown separated from each other. So make sure you always give these a good shake before you start using them. Even your shades that don't look separated, oftentimes the gloss part of the mixture will separate to the top. And so if you don't shake your paints beforehand, you tend to get a glossy finish on things like shades and contrast paints. And then there are some like Agrax Earthshade, the new mixture for it is just always a little bit glossy, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's what Games Workshop has done with their color. Okay, get our Nazdrag yellow here. We're switching back to that slightly more worn out brush that I used for my shades earlier. When we do this, it's okay to go heavy on the parts back here that are larger. But when we do the trim on the armor, we want to be careful not to overpaint. I might even switch down to a smaller size brush if this proves to be too annoying to do it this way. Now I chose Nazdrag yellow because I wanted it to further make the leather different from the armor, or not the armor, but the skin. And I'm thinking this is the color I used. It's just looking really bright right now, which is fine. It'll get changed a little bit when we do our highlighting. When you do this, be careful not to get too much paint soaked up in your brush, because like I just did there, I got too much paint in one spot and had to actually wipe the paint off on my paper towel here because it was going to just run all over this belt and ruin it. Now I might have to go through with a bit of just a damp brush. Ugh. Yeah, you see how the Nazdrag yellow got spread out right through there? And it's totally turning this metal into a yellow color, and I don't want that. So we're just going to kind of try to soak up as much of that as we can. And we might have to go back through with the mixture from before and fix that. Yeah, I think I might switch to a slightly more controlled brush as I'm getting around to these spots where it's a little harder to get to. So here we go, we're switching to the brush this is the same brush I used for basing the teal on the skirt. This will give me just a little bit more control over where this ends up. Wow, time is really flying. We're already almost at 8 o'clock, which means that we only have about an hour left in the stream tonight. We've made some really great progress. I do think we're going to get almost finished. We'll get close enough that I can just do the last few details on my own, and we'll paint something different next time. And I'm not sure exactly what we'll paint next time. Part of that might depend on what's in that package that Parabellum is sending me. If it is like the new Wadroon or the new Old Dominion models that are coming out this month, then maybe we'll paint one of those on the next stream. Wadroon would be a lot of fun to put on the stream. I think they'd go pretty fast too. We'd probably get through a model in a single night, because I know their paint scheme pretty well. But if you guys have specific requests, let me know. Like, I can get pretty much any model, depending on if it's one that I already have or one that I want to get. It'll be faster. If it's one that I'm not going to use, it might get put a little lower on the priority list. But this applies to also to my tutorials. If there's a specific tutorial you'd like to see, let me know and I can add it to the to-do list. Jocelyn, I had to kind of laugh at your comment there, because it's very true. Like, I have off to the side of my painting table just all these projects where I started them, made some good progress one evening while painting, and then they just sit there for months sometimes. In fact, I've got a Bellacore model that I'm supposed to be painting for somebody else. It's been, I think, 18 months that I've had it sitting here now, where I'll work on it a little bit here and there. Now, the person's used it a few times. Like, since I host most of the events here at my house, they have no problem with me just holding onto the model and slowly working on it. At least none that they've told me about. That's part of the reason why I don't normally take commission projects, because when it comes to painting for somebody other than myself, or if it's not something I'm putting on my YouTube channel, I'm slow. I did a Taunar project for a friend, and I had his model for a year and a half before I finally finished it. I felt bad. Luckily, that was a chill friend, and he's okay with me just holding some of his models hostage for extended periods of time. Depending on how you look at it, it gives him an excuse to come visit and pick up the models. My city-states army is going to take forever to paint, because they're not... So, like, when I painted my Old Dominion last year, I was trying to get a 2,000-point army that would be my main army up and running. Because prior to that, I just had, like, a little bit of every army, and none of them were quite matching what I wanted from an army. And so when the Old Dominion came out and I was all excited about them, I spent, like, a lot of time just pumping out the paintwork on them. City-states are not going to be that way. They are going to eventually be my main army, I think. But where I have a playable army, I'm not in a hurry to get through all these guys. So I expect it'll be a year before I have a playable, fully painted army of city-states. Which is fine. Like I said, I'm not in a hurry to get this army painted. I do need to get a bunch of models assembled. I haven't assembled most of my city-states yet. And I do have about 1,000 points of playable models like that I own for the army already. I just need to go build them all, and then I can start actually playing this army. And part of that's just been because I've been busy focusing on the YouTube channel. I've gotten kind of a tunnel vision, zoomed in on making sure I get videos out every week for my channel, or close to every week. Next week is going to be interesting to see if I can get the video out on time, because it's I've been painting Angron, and whenever I do a big model project, it takes twice as much time and gets half as many views. But I'm trying to finish him before Tuesday. Ideally, I'd like to have him done Monday morning so that I can edit the video all day Monday. But there's still a lot to do on him. I'm kind of in the same boat, Jocelyn, where I really like this army and I want it to look good. I want it to be probably my best looking army, at least for now. And so I'm taking it slow. Like, when I did my Old Dominion, I would take a whole regiment of 12 models and sit down and just work on them nonstop all day to get them up to battle ready. But with the city-states, I think I'm just going to go one stand at a time, and I'll just take one stand and work on it. And when it's done, then I can get the next stand out and build them and paint them. So it's going to be very slow. But they're going to look awesome. Okay, I think we have shaded all the leather. That took a minute because there is a lot of it. Now, I did notice as I was shading, there's a spot where I missed the leather. So we're going to go back and pick that out right now. So right here, the strap that goes around his arm is exposed on the front, and I didn't notice earlier. Going back and painting this color on this strap is making me realize just how much the contrast paint we just used changed the color of this leather. Okay, let that dry for a minute. Yes, it turns out you can, in fact, paint less than 6 stands at a time. Surprising as that might seem. Which, Judd, I have to compliment you on your painting. I have been very impressed as I see you post on Facebook, and you're like, oh, I just casually sat down and painted, 6 stands of infantry for a tournament this weekend, or recently with your statues, you pumped out 4 squads of them within a week. You possess a skill that I do not. I am not a speed painter. When I try to go fast, I just end up making things look terrible. Now, when I do batch paint, so my Conquest group here locally, we kind of alternate. 1 week we'll play and 1 week we'll paint. Those paint nights have been some of my most effective paint nights. I'll sit down with 3 stands of models and I'll get them all to tabletop standard within that 3 or 4 hours that we paint. Man, you're going to have 1,200 points painted by the end of the month. That's great. I look forward to seeing it. I'm sure I'll see more pictures of it. I've already seen some of your work with the Minotaurs you painted, and they look awesome. Okay, while we're waiting on that to dry, we're going to take, if I can find it, Agrax Earthshade. We're going to put this on the parts of the handle that have the bark on them. we're not too worried about overpainting a little bit with this one, because this is the same shade we used on the skin. So if you overpaint a little bit, you can just go back through and pick out the skin again with that same color that we used before. I'm going pretty heavy with this. You don't have to go this heavy. In fact, I probably went a little too heavy in some spots. And I'll need to absorb some of it back up into the brush. You have lost an entire box of unassembled Terminators. How do you just lose a box of models? Did you put them in another box and then forgot where that box ended up? Okay, we're going to bring the Nazdrag yellow back and just go shade that spot that I missed before. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to bring back the iron breaker, and there's a couple little spots I want to touch up where I overpainted with the shade and turned it a little yellow. Just going to fix those real quick. And it's something you don't see when you watch my tutorials. You don't get to see me doing all the cleanup of my mistakes, but rest assured I make plenty of mistakes during the painting process. Okay, better. And we're going to see if I have any of the bronze left. I do. We're in luck. I don't have to mix up more. So we're also going to touch up a few of the bronze spots that I feel got a little too yellow from the shade getting on them. A lot of these spots I'm touching up right now, you probably won't even be able to notice that they're more yellow than they should be, because I kind of doubt the camera is picking that up quite the way I'm seeing it. It's a good thing I did this, because I actually discovered the inside of this right in here behind his arm, I completely didn't paint those before. So it's a good thing I went back and started doing this, or I would have just left them copper forever. Better. Okay, so now we've got to decide what to do next. I think we're going to edge highlight our leather, and what we're going to do, we're going to mix the leather brown that we used before with a little bit of Xandri dust to create a mid-tone between the two. so that we have a color that is not quite this light, but not quite this dark, to use as our edge highlight color. And this is what I did in my tutorial on YouTube as well. So pretty straightforward. And first we're going to check to see if there's any wet paint left over. There is, from when we used this before. So add a little bit of water to keep that from drying out. And we're just going to add a little dollop of Xandri dust in there. Get a little bit of water to help these two mix a little bit better. Okay, and there's our color we've created. And now we're getting a detail brush again. This is a size 0, but it's a different size 0 than the one I've been using for basing. This one's got still a little bit finer point on it. And here, these leather straps do have sharp enough edges that you can use the side of your brush like you're supposed to when you edge highlight. At least most of them are. There'll still be edges that are a little too round. That's just kind of how Conquest sculpts go sometimes. They don't go quite as sharp on their edges. Now these inner edges of the leather are going to be a little harder. You will have to use the tip of your brush for them because they're not quite deep enough. The rivets aren't like the indent isn't deep enough to be able to use the side of your brush very well. Now this particular Minotaur, his leather trim on his armor has all these individual stitches in it where they sewed the armor, the leather. We're going to highlight all of those as well because we're crazy and we like to do that kind of stuff. Now, I messed up there, so wipe that off. If you have too much water in your brush or in your mixture, then highlighting becomes a nightmare. But if you have too little, it becomes too clunky and like chunky, and it doesn't look good. So you have to find the right consistency. You could also do this by dry brushing. I just chose not to because I like the control that you get with doing it manually with the brush, but I also don't want to risk accidentally turning all the details around the leather trim tan, because that would kind of ruin a lot of our work we've done so far. Pretty crazy how much edge highlighting can change the look of a model. When I first got into painting, I didn't edge highlight like anything. I would dry brush, I would base coat, and I would shade. Those were the 3 techniques that I knew how to do, and so I never edge highlighted anything. And now that I've started to learn the skill and get good at it, it really is a game changer for my painting. But not everything needs to be edge highlighted. There is a point where you go too over the top, especially when you're doing highlights that don't blend well with the color they're highlighting over. There is a point where you just go overboard and it just doesn't look good anymore. Zargifley, I'm glad you were able to find your Terminators. Was it as I suspected? Did they just get thrown in another box of models and that box then just got buried? They were hiding amongst other sprues under your bed, so I'm assuming that means you didn't actually have them in their box then. You had taken the sprues out. I've done that a few times. My city-states right now, for example, none of them are in boxes. They're all a pile of sprues sitting in a pile with other sprues. So they could very easily get lost, I suppose. In fact, I think in that same pile of sprues, off the top of my head, there is a Chaos Knight Abominant. There is a squad of like Kiris for the Old Dominion. And I don't even know what else is in there, but there's other kits in there. I know that much. I think there's actually some terrain kits as well in my pile of shame. So this particular shoulder pad, these outer ones, I'm running into the issue that I pointed out earlier where some of the edges are too round to do edge highlighting using the side of your brush. So in this case I am having to use the tip of the brush to kind of freehand that line. There's no actual seam there to highlight because those edges are slightly rounded. And this is a really cool model. I'm really happy with the way this is turning out. I have this thing for brute models in Conquest. Like every army that I have a collection for, I have the brute models, and they're the only ones that are actually painted. Something about models that are just this size and this level of bulkiness, just, I don't know, I just enjoy it. And honestly, it's kind of funny because when the Old Dominion came out, I was super excited for the Bone Golems, and I love the Bone Golems. Parabellum just keeps like one-upping themselves on the brute units they release. Cause like the Minotaurs are just an awesome kit, and I think they could almost rival the Bone Golems for being some of my favorite models. And I'm really excited. We're supposedly going to be getting the werewolves for the Nords sometime later this year. And that's a unit I'm personally really excited for. I'm excited to see Parabellum's interpretation of the idea of a werewolf. And I'm hoping it matches the concept art that appears in the companion book. And I think it appears in some of the rules packets in the background as well. And lately I've been debating, since we know that the Thunder Riders are coming out for the Wadroon later this year, I've kind of been debating if I should pull out my Wadroon and start painting my army of Wadroon so that when those come out, I can pick up the Thunder Riders and just throw together a heavy cavalry list. I think that would be a lot of fun. Well, we're hitting the point. There's only about a half hour left in the live stream here. There's a little bit more. There's like 35 minutes, roughly. But let me know if there's anything you guys want to chat about, any questions you have. And then I asked previously if there was anything people wanted to see in future live streams or tutorials. I'm still curious to hear your guys' answer on that. I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean, Uruk-bai, when you say that you would know that the cow hair is convincing. Do you own cows? Is that what you're saying? Either way, thank you for the compliment. This wasn't terribly hard to do the hair effects on this model. Or it's entirely possible you're being sarcastic. I don't know. You never really do know when you're chatting with people through text chat, I suppose. Well, Uruk-bai, thank you for the compliment on the cow hair. I think overall I'm happy with these models. They're really fun. Okay, so some videos for the Nord half of the new starter set. So that would be Huskarls. I have some of those I could do a video on pretty easily. I could pick up another Mountain Jotnar. I did buy the 2-player starter set, but I split it with a Nord player, so I don't have the exclusive Konungur model that comes in it. But I could probably get the Jotnar and the Huskarls in tutorials in the future pretty easily. And then I think it's Bow Chosen or the other unit in there. I do have a few Bow Chosen sitting in my prize support pool, so maybe I'll just have to win one from myself. There will definitely be a tutorial on the either Varangian Guard or the Athanatoi. However, I can't say how soon. I don't know. I know that Parabellum has something they're sending me, because I've got a tracking number for a shipment that they're sending to me, and it's labeled as preview models, but they didn't specify what preview models. I'll find out next week when they get here. I am assuming it's either the Athanatoi kit or the new Wadroon kit, which I'm excited for. Ooh, now there's a challenge. Tattoos. So I've done tattoos on one model before. I did one on Mozrog Scragbad for my orc army. It can be a fun process to make tattoos on models. It can also be really annoying. I could almost do a whole tutorial just on how to do the tattoos. So, Urukbai, to answer your question, the 100 Kingdoms and Spires starter set was the very first wave of models they made. So those are, those would be the worst models in the game. The quality of the newer models is much better. Much, much better. All the way down to like the pieces are numbered. You'll still have the occasional bit of mold lining to clean up, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. And then the faces on newer models are more detailed, for the most part. So yeah, the quality has definitely gone up, and they keep escalating the quality with each kit they release. Like, it's actually been kind of funny, because there have been a few sets that they've actually delayed their release because while they were sculpting the project, they discovered some new, technique or just new art style direction and have completely resculpted some of their kits during the production process. It's been kind of funny. I think the best example would be the Steel Forged for the Dwegome. We're supposed to come out last year, and I think they said that they just weren't satisfied with the models, and so they were delaying them because they weren't ready. I personally think that what happened is they got working on them and decided, you know what, we can make these a lot cooler looking. Judd, I could just go both. I could do war paint and tattoos. It depends on the tattoos. Like, if it's just basic tattoos, like basic Viking Nordic symbols, that might be manageable on an exposed shoulder or something. I wouldn't be able to go too crazy, though, because there comes a point where my freehanding skills just kind of fall off. That's something I would like to improve in my own painting skill. I see all these guys that like freehand portraits on the sides of their like Titans and stuff for Warhammer. I would love to be able to do something like that, but that is a whole other skill that I have not developed. Gonna be honest, highlighting this leather is starting to get a little boring. Because I think this is the, with this color, this will be the third pass-through we've done on this leather. We've basically been working on this leather for the last hour. But it is looking pretty decent. If I had my Mozrog Orc Boss model on hand, I would show you the tattoos I've done in the past. They weren't anything too fancy. It was basic kind of tribal shapes on the shoulder. I kind of tried to mimic the box art on that particular model a little bit, although it didn't get quite exact because my tattoos were a little larger and more space consuming than the ones on the box. I'm getting a little bit more sloppy with my highlighting as I get further along in this. I think some of that is just my own impatience starting to come to the surface, because I do kind of want to move on to not brown. And we're almost done. We just have the main belt still to highlight, I think. And even then it's only part of it, because there's parts I've already highlighted. It is very tempting at this point to just like throw a dry brush and another wash over this leather. I'll confess to that. Especially some of the spots where I'm having a hard time keeping my lines thin enough. But sometimes you just have to stick with it. It's worth it in the end. That's what you have to tell yourself. That's what I have to tell myself, at least. It's also getting a little bit more sloppy because at this point I've been using the brush longer, and it's starting to get, it needs to be rinsed like a deep soak, because it's starting to get paint that's drying in the bristles, or the bristles are just, they almost need a rest. Like they're not alive, they're not going to recover, but sometimes letting your brushes have a chance to dry out, rinse them out thoroughly, helps rejuvenate them. And right now I'm hitting that point where this brush is starting to need a good thorough cleaning, I think. Oh, don't worry, I'm washing the brush out. Like, every time you see it go off screen, that's me rinsing it in my rinsing cup here. I'm talking like, even with rinsing your brush, there will be paint that gets in the bristles that dries and stuff. And you just have to do that deeper clean where you actually put, like, I find dish soap to be the best thing for deep cleaning brushes. Dish soap and then hot water with a bit of vinegar in it. Although if the water's too hot, it will ruin your brush, so you have to be careful. At least if you're using synthetic brushes, which I am. Okay, there's one little bit left up front here that I'm going to paint, and then I think we're going to call the leather good. And if I decide there's stuff I want to fix later on, I'll do it on my own. Ooh, that was rough. Good to know. I want to get into more sable hair brushes. That's something I've done some research into, and I like the way they... At least I like the way people on the internet make them sound like they behave. I at the very least want to get some sable hair brushes for my super fine detail. Because I'm hitting a point where I want to step up the detail I do and get some finer brushes. Because I mean, these brushes are fine. Like the size 0 and the size is smaller than that. But I don't have any good brushes that I like for the super, like the insane detail. Okay, call that good on the leather for now. Okay, I lied. We're also going to use this color as a very minor, very fast highlight on the bark on these handles, just to help them pop a little bit more. And we're being pretty generous with this highlight here. Ooh, that was a little too generous maybe up there. Oh well. Okay, good enough. So here's where we're at. We still got the eyes, the horns, and then we've got to do the handle of this. And if the box art, when I looked at this model like with no paint on it, I thought this was just going to be wood that had already been like stripped of the bark. But looking at the box art, they actually do a metal haft on this particular axe. I think I might mimic that. So we're going to pull Lead Belcher back out. So, Judd, you mentioned battle reports. I don't have a good answer for you right now on that. Battle reports are something where I've been kind of on the fence because they take quite a bit of editing to throw together. Or at least they'll take me quite a bit of editing to throw together. But what I was thinking is live battles would be a kind of fun thing to do, because I know a little bit more about live streaming than I do editing a battle report. And so I was wondering if maybe I should invest in the camera and lighting setup, because I have a table right behind me for wargaming. I've got 3 in my apartment. So I'm wondering if I should get the cameras and lights and live stream games. And if I do start doing that, it's still months off. I'd have to research it. The lighting for a scene that large, like showing off a whole table and having it be a clear image, I'd want to get a better camera, better lights. Maybe multiple cameras. I don't know. And then on top of that, I'd have to find some people that I trust to appear on the channel and still keep kind of like the standards that I have for the channel. You know, no swearing and little things like that. Now, I have some people in mind, and I know there's some friends that have expressed their interest to do that occasionally. And I was thinking if I did do multiple camera angles, it could be really cool. Like, there's cameras that you use in like convention centers and for big like concert halls and stuff, where the cameras can actually like zoom all the way in on, like, if you were a camera operator, you could actually zoom all the way in on somebody's text message on the opposite side of the concert hall. I've seen cameras like that. If I could get something smaller so that I could have a third person like operating the cameras off in another room and like being able to zoom in on the combats that were important, I think that would be super cool. I think it'd be kind of expensive to get that kind of a setup, but that's kind of what I envision when I think of a cool, top-notch live stream game. When I do get into that, if I decide to go that route, obviously they won't be that way for a while. At first they will be very, very low production value. Like, it'll be a kind of like how my first live stream and even my second and even this one, they're kind of like, they're okay, but they're not as good as they could be. Now, I could see a day in the future, like, if this channel takes off more, because it's been going really well. Like, it's been growing faster than a lot of other channels do. If it continues to go well, I could see me arriving at a point someday where I actually can hire on other people to do the video editing for me. At that point, I could see myself doing battle reports. If I don't have to do all the editing myself, that would be great. Because I mean, I have basic editing skills, enough to produce the videos that I've made so far, but a battle report, I feel like there's a lot more going on, because you have to be, I don't know, I've never done it, so it's mostly just me assuming that there's more to it, I suppose. Okay, we've got the metal part of the handle done. We're going to let that dry, though, because this particular lead belcher isn't super fast at drying, because I watered it down just a little bit. And I mainly watered it down because this particular pot is arriving at the end of its lifespan, and so the paint that's in there is slightly on the drier end of life. In fact, we'll put just a little drop of water in there with it, just to make sure that it doesn't completely dry out before I can get to the game store and get another pot. Now, if I started doing the live streamed games, would you guys rather see games like First Blood and Kill Team, maybe 1,000-point games, or would you like to see full-size games of Conquest? Like a 2,000-point game played over 2.5 hours could be kind of fun to watch. Okay, you know what I didn't do that I should have done? When I did my other Minotaur, I based the horns in the same brown that we used for the leather. And I didn't do that here. So, I'm going to get a little bit more of this brown paint out. And we're going to take care of that. Nope. Helps if you get the right color. Getting to the point where I have multiple colors still wet on my palette. And I just totally grabbed the wrong shade of brown. Okay, here we go. Now the horns, unfortunately, you probably won't get to see me finish those tonight because I think we're going to run out of time. But I did a really fun experiment on my first Minotaur where after I got the brown base on, I did sort of a hybrid between dry brushing and edge highlighting where I just kind of dragged the dry brush along the length of the horns with my brush applying less pressure as I got towards the tip, and it actually turned out really good. Very organic looking. Because I tried manually highlighting it, and it just wasn't turning out. It was too... like, the lines were too perfect, if that makes sense. Because things in nature aren't perfect. Especially things like horns that take a lot of wear and tear and are used for fighting and stuff. See, and I think games of Necromunda streamed on a channel would be tons of fun, because it's all very narrative, especially if you had people that were good at being narrative about the game and being comical at the same time. I think First Blood could do that as well, especially if you had good terrain, so it was very dense and the games were very tactical. I think that could be a lot of fun. This particular horn is kind of hard to get the part of it right in here. So maybe when you do your own, it might be worth it to keep this shoulder pad off until you're done painting. So, I know it's been said that we are for sure getting an updated version of the Quests and Legends campaign system. Quests and Legends? Maybe that's what's called, the Legends campaign system that's in the campaign book. We are going to get an updated version of that that's designed for 2.0 for both First Blood and Last Argument, I believe. Because the current campaign system does have rules for playing First Blood, at least if you're doing the map campaign. I'm excited to see an updated version of those, because I really love the campaign systems they have already. Especially the map campaign. We're getting ready to launch one of those here in my local group. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's like a giant game of Risk between your matches of Conquest. But I know that they've said they are for sure doing an updated version of that this year sometime. And if you haven't done the map campaign system, I highly recommend looking into it, even though the book is out of date and is going to get replaced later this year. It's still a really good book, has lots of lore in it, and then it has an awesome set of instructions for how to run a map campaign with hexagon-based territories. And it has everything from, like if you're at your main fortress and somebody's attacking you, you play a game of First Blood, because instead of being an all-out battle, it's an assassination mission where the enemy is trying to assassinate your general. and it's very narrative based. Like, as you upgrade the world map with fortifications and farms and stuff, it actually changes how you play the game when you play on those tiles that you've upgraded. For example, if you've built a fortification, it'll actually let you bring a couple garrisons to the board, and after you've set up the terrain, you just say, I'm going to swap this piece of terrain for a garrison. And so you can kind of control the battlefield to represent that you have the home field advantage in that territory, which I think is super cool. Okay, we're going to bring out Basilicanum Grey again. Got about 5 minutes left in the stream tonight. It's coming to its end. Time really flew by tonight. We're just going to use the Basilicanum Grey to get this handle to look like the rest of the axe. Might have gone a little bit heavy there, but that's okay because we'll be dry brushing it or highlighting it with the iron breaker later on. That sounds really exciting. You'll have to post lots of pictures. I'm thinking when I do our map campaign, I am going to make a few videos going over how to run a map campaign and like showing off the accessories that we've made to make the campaign more fun. I'm really excited. We've been working on it for months now. We've got I have a guy that has a bunch of 3D print files for these hexagon, like 3-dimensional territories for the map. And so I've had him print around 100 tiles for me. Now, squirrel for just a second. I am putting Agrax Earth Shade on the horns here, in case you were wondering what shade I'm using. But yeah, we've been printing all these cool tiles, so we're going to have a 3-dimensional map. And we're going to drill holes in all the tiles so we can put little banners on them to mark who controls that territory. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I think we've got 7, maybe 8 people that will be participating in the campaign. So be looking for videos about that campaign in the next few months. I don't know exactly when we're going to start it. We had hoped to start it by the end of February. But I haven't gotten a chance to paint the tiles yet. I've been busy with the City-States releases. So First Blood is an interesting game system. I enjoy it, but I feel like the games need to be about 200 points larger. Like, instead of 800 points being the standard, I feel like it needs to be 1,000. I've felt that with how some of the scenarios are designed, it plays better if you have that extra, like, 2 squads of units, because some of the scenarios have so many objective zones to capture that if you take any like brute units or cavalry or anything that's more expensive, you're not going to have enough infantry to cap all the zones. So I feel like if it was just a little bit larger for the standard game size, it would play quite a bit better. But that's just my opinion. I'll probably be playing some First Blood with my City-States here in the next week or so, because I'm getting to the point where I've got enough of them painted. I've also been working on my 3rd Minotaur. Here he is. I've still got to do all of his belly because he's got a tan belly. But I did his back in the black. Yeah, he's turning out really cool too. But there are the 3 of them so far. And we're pretty much at the end of our time tonight, so I was just kind of chatting to kind of end the night out, but we have reached the end, it looks like. So, reminder, next week we will not live stream. Next week I'm going to have a family thing on Friday, And then the Friday after that, we'll be back at it. We'll be painting up models and streaming. I'll probably do a poll for what we'll paint that week, and part of that will depend on what Parabellum is sending me this week. If it's something new, a new kit of some sort, we'll be definitely featuring that here. So you guys have a great night. Thank you for coming out to support the stream. We'll catch you next time. And have a great night.